good afternoon or good morning to those of you joining from the US, and welcome to the second episode in our online workshop series hosted by Digital Healthworks. My name's Romy. I'm going to be moderating our discussion today, and I've got Nidhi and Pascal who are joining me as speakers and who will introduce themselves in a few minutes. So just to start off with a reminder of the vision we have for these Digital Healthworks workshops. Nidhi, if you want to go to the next slide, that would be great. Thanks. So the idea we had for these workshops is really to have a casual interaction. We've got two of our experts joining us today who are going to take you through a 15 to 20-minute presentation, and then we're going to follow that up with 10 minutes of discussion. So feel free to type in your questions into the chat, and I'll make sure to answer them or to bring them up. And then you're also very welcome to unmute yourselves and turn on your videos at the end of the session and just join in directly and ask your questions directly. Next slide, please. So as a little introduction to Digital Healthworks, so we are a commercialization agency working in digital health and medtech ventures, and we help bring innovations to the US and European markets. Thank you. And, unfortunately, we know that building a business in the digital health and medtech space is hard. And so in response to that, we've got a team of amazing experts based out of Boston, Berlin, and Lisbon. And we focus our work on three core areas of our expertise. So that encompasses market access, regulatory, and sales. And with us today, we've got our two speakers. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nidhi Gani. I am a regulatory advisor here at Digital Healthworks, and I come from the experience of digital health and cybersecurity space. And I'm excited to go through the webinar here and answer any questions anyone has. So I will pass it on to Pascal.
Yeah, hi, I'm Pascal. I work in digital health since around 2013, like initially more from a founder's perspective and software development, and then over time more transitioning into regulatory, and for about 5 years now doing consulting, advising for medical device, digital health, or digital therapeutic, however you want to call it nowadays, regulatory, to some extent data privacy and security. And yeah, looking forward to the presentation.
Awesome. All right. Moving forward, today we will be talking about regulatory product development, and let's see what we have in-house. So the beginning of all development, generally when founders or product managers think of starting the development, you typically look at what is the intended use. Think about intended use like the goal, right? It's the goal of what your product should actually be doing. And that's why you set this intended use, and Pascal will give us examples in a bit. Generally, what we think that intended use is, you thinking it it's something where what your device is expected to do, what your device is designed to be used for. But generally, it turns out to be that whatever you can claim on your label, that is what your intended use is. So there's a confusion between the expectation of what your product should be doing or what your product should look like versus what actually goes on in the label claims based on all the evidence you are able to generate. And let's look at a few examples which Pascal will give us based on his experiences and different kinds of devices that we currently see on the market.
Okay, can you hear me? Just to double check on that. Okay, so yeah, let's look at a few examples, because I mean, also for me initially it was like not necessarily completely obvious, like what the difference between the product itself and then like the intended use is. So like, let's look at a hearing aid. I mean, now like those things that you put behind or in your ear to help you hear better. And so is it a medical device or lifestyle product? And actually, I mean, it depends. Or like, let's say a hearing aid is a medical device, but if you call it a hearing aid, but if you take a product like the hardware that is used for hearing aid and just change the software settings a tiny little bit, you could turn it into a non-medical device. Basically, then called like a personal sound amplifying product or similar. So it's like a bit similar to like glasses versus reading glasses. Like the one would be customized to the individual like vision or hearing in case of hearing aids. And the other one would come with a few like predefined settings, like reading glasses you would buy in a normal grocery store or wherever, and similar to like those lifestyle hearing aids, but the hardware itself may be the very same, and what they do may be the very same, just that the one is really customized and the other not in this example. So the one is really intended to be used to treat your very individual hearing. That makes it a medical device. And the other one is just, we are supposed to help you in like a handful of everyday situations, which makes it a non-medical or lifestyle product. That's the one. And then the other, so with digital therapeutics, like apps that are coming around more and more countries have reimbursement schemes for that. Like here, it's not about medical devices versus non. I mean, we'll also discuss that, but it's a different story. Like here, for example, like what the FDA just really looks out for is like how strong is the claim that you make, or like the claim on the clinical benefit. Like, does the product alleviate symptoms, or does it actually treat the disease? I mean, those are obviously two fairly different things, but maybe, I mean, depending on the product, of course, like maybe it can do both, but like maybe you only have clinical data, like meaning the results of a clinical study that proves that it alleviates symptoms, but not actually treats the disease yet. But maybe with a follow-up study, you could prove that, oh, it actually also treats the disease. And well, then you would update the intended use, but it may actually, you may not have to make any change to the product. Then now coming to Apple Watch, which is like a fairly interesting one. I mean, not just because they had to deactivate the blood oxygen, like the SpO2 sensor now for some patent issues, but it's more recent. But I mean, they already had it before. And like with their heart monitor part, they had actually like a medical device function within the Apple Watch. But interestingly, the SpO2 is not. So in this case, and I leave that like more up for interpretation, but like there are plenty of medical use cases for blood oxygen, but only like really very few for high performance athletes, also where it's relevant to monitor that. So still wondering, like, what is the lifestyle use case of blood oxygen monitor? Yeah, and then the last one, hearing tests. Like, so I think this example here is good for understanding like what is basically the repercussion or like the potential impact on the decisions made based on the information from that medical device. Like, let's say if you have a hearing test that you use for screening, I mean, it'll probably only tell you what you already know anyways. You're not hearing very well. But let's say when you're going to an ER and you had like an acute hearing loss or have an acute hearing loss, and they need to run some testing for then potentially injecting drugs into your ear, well, you want to be sure that it really works. So like in this case, like the repercussions if the results are wrong are a lot higher than with the screening. So meaning that's the reason why the second one would undergo a lot more scrutiny than the first one, even though it may be the very same product. Okay, hope those examples helped some, and back to you, Nidhi.
Yes. Yeah. To sum it up, intended use is that statement that is pretty much going to decide whether your product is going to be a medical device or not, and what part of the software would it fall under? Would it fall under software as a medical device or device software functions, which we are not going to get into as much detail in this webinar, but we'll be following up through next webinars. But moving on to the next piece, which is the design risk. Now that you have set your intended use based on whether your intended use is used for treatment or whether it is just used for screening, now you're going to think about what risks does your device actually pose. Take, for example, a continuous glucose monitor, which a lot of companies these days compete to put the continuous glucose monitor. So here in a continuous glucose monitor, you have a wearable device where you're looking into it gives you all the predictive analysis of what your glucose levels look like in the morning, in the evening, depending on how you maintain your diet the whole day. So that's why you also have exercising, sitting, diet planning, and then you have a continuous glucose monitor measurement that will actually monitor your device. Earlier, these were all hardware, but today, because we live in the cyber world, all of these are connected. And because all of these are connected, it gives rise to different kinds of risks. Of course, the first one, but ultimately, when you're looking at risks, you have to look at it from the standpoint that how is it going to harm patients? Because ultimately, regulatory is about ensuring product safety and efficacy to maintain public health. So when you're looking at such an example, the higher risk is where you're looking at the failure could lead to hyper or hypoglycemia and to sometimes even death. A medium injury would be something where you have hyper or hypoglycemia, but it does not lead to irreparable damage like death, but you still want to be avoiding such risk. And the low risk is where you have delay of treatment. But you now have to figure out how are you going to reduce these risks. Now that you have the risks, you also have to think about how you're going to mitigate these risks or how you're going to reduce the risks to as low as possible. But we'll look at examples of how you're going to classify these risks as well. Over to you, Pascal. Hello.
Okay, I had you unmute. So now it should work. Yeah, so the first is like coming to kind of going in line with the example from the hearing test earlier. So that's like we also see like the connection between the intended use and then the potential risks. So I mean, we talked about it earlier. Some like, let's say if you use a hearing test in the ER to decide whether there is like a strong enough acute hearing loss to then, I mean, in the worst case, you need like injection of steroids right in your ear, and you obviously don't want it if you don't need it. So, I mean, there are potential medical strong side effects from that. So you only want to do it if it's needed, meaning you want to really make sure that the hearing test works correctly in this case. And the second, so while obviously we'll mostly look at risk from the perspective of like harm to patients, like over the last years, like more and more focus was also put on cyber risks. So I mean, some of them, like let's say if you have like like an issue, if someone can hack your database or your algorithms, obviously that can also have then again harm to patients, but like also the very leak of data itself. I mean, it's not a harm to patients typically, except for some specific cases, but more like a data privacy risk. And that is also something that the FDA is more looking into, and basically all regulatory bodies. So yeah, that's something to definitely also consider for risks. And then let's look at a new example, like software as a contraceptive. I mean, typically those are condoms and similar products, and they are typically classified as fairly high risk products. And like let's because you also, I mean, let's say, I mean, typically say like being pregnant is not a disease, right? I mean, from a medical perspective, but I mean, it sounds wrong, but anyways, but like what you would also look here is like, what if you try to not become pregnant because, you know, you have certain conditions where it just wouldn't go well. So, and what you then, let's say if you have a software that based on certain statistics, tells you whether you likely get pregnant on a certain day or not. And let's say, well, just giving the wrong recommendation here can obviously lead to quite some harm. And that would be like another example for like a design risk here. Okay, back to you, Nidhi.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so basically risks are where every product is going to have its own risks, and that's what we are getting at here, based on the glucose monitor, hearing test, leak of data, and the contraceptive. Every device is unique, so every device is going to have its own risk, and that's why it's important to identify these risks early on, because some are patient risks, and like Pascal said, some are non-patient risks, but those are very well risks as well, because they lead to business risk and reputational risk of the company as well. So now that we have understood what risks are, you move to design controls, because you know how, I think medical device product development is a very smart way of developing products, because whenever you're going to develop a product, the best way to typically develop a product is to first identify everything that can go wrong with the product, and then think about how can we make things right, rather than just going blind and just starting to design the product. So now that you identify what your risks are, you then have design controls. The name itself is self-explanatory, where you're controlling the design in a way where you are able to mitigate these risks and then you're also with an intention to meet your intended use. So there's a methodical approach from a quality standpoint and a regulatory standpoint when it comes to design controls. So you start with user needs. This is where if you hire a marketing person, they do some market research and they come back with certain set of requirements, where you're looking at how should the device what are the requirements of the device. Some requirements could look like, from a glucose monitor standpoint, the device should be able to work for type 2 diabetes patients within a range of 50 to maybe 300 mmHg, those units, right? So that's one. And then Pascal will give us more examples as well. But from when you set those kinds of requirements, these are marketing requirements, and then you move on to a much deeper requirement from there, which are design inputs. Think of design inputs as, of course, product requirements, but these design inputs should be, today I hand over these design inputs to an engineer. This engineer should be able to take these design inputs and develop a product exactly like how you would want to develop it. That means it's going to be in a very detailed format, where again, Pascal will give us more examples. With respect to design outputs, now that you have set these design inputs, you know how your product is exactly going to look like, be it from the screen length, the screen brightness, the fonts that you're going to use. It's going to be very in-depth, the design inputs. The design outputs is again self-explanatory, where now that you have these inputs, how is my output going to look like? Did I actually design the screen using the same resolution that the design inputs had? Did I use the same font size? Did I use the same screen length? All of that is going to be as part of your design output. Once you have these design outputs, now comes the time to verify. Because if you are not going to verify, how else are you going to know if you're building the device right? Because your design, so the way to do that is your design outputs should meet your design inputs. That's the way you're going to verify whether you are on the right path. And you have to verify is not the right word, but you typically verify after every requirement, or combine a bunch of requirements together to verify, to make sure that you're on the right track. And every step is going to also be part of a regulatory and quality review. Once you verify, then you move to validation. In validation, now you're going to look at, did your device actually meet the user needs or not? Because ultimately, you want to be meeting those marketing requirements, those requirements to validate. To confuse probably a little bit, verification is if you are building the device right, and validation is to ensure that you are building the right device. you are not going to know if you build the right device until you're actually going to verify with your marketing requirements, right? So that's where verification and validation comes into picture. There are multiple ways of validation, especially when it comes to software, like analytical, clinical evaluation, clinical validation, which we are not again going to go depth in these workshops, but we can have a separate, probably a webinar on validation itself to generate clinical evidence. But I will pass it on to Pascal to give us a little bit more depth on user needs and design inputs.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll give a few examples. And in case you wonder, like we don't have a slide for the example somehow got lost in the slide making process. But anyways, and also let's speed up a little bit because we want to be done in time and also still have some time for questions. So I could talk about this topic forever, but I'll try to keep it short. So let's go over like an example for user need and design inputs and for the rest. So like, Cindy was saying like user needs is more like describing like kind of the how and or no, sorry, like the kind of why do we need to do something and like basically really describing like what does the user need. And I would also extend it some, not just like the actual end user of the device, but also other stakeholders. Like let's say if it turns out you want the device to be able to export data to a certain like hospital system, then this would be like a user or stakeholder need. Or if you wanted it to be kind of, let's say if you have like a software that analyzes, like an AI tool that analyzes MRIs, then you would put in like which MRI machines you're supporting, for example. So it's basically, so it's like that stuff that you can review with your customers or users, and also typically like a level of detail that management understands very well. Like one more example to then go to design inputs is like in regards to like transport encryption, like you would just say like according to state of the art, for example. But then when it comes to design input, like you're translating the user needs into like something that engineers understand. And in this case, it would be saying like a transport layer encryption happens according to TLS 1.2 or higher. I mean, there are more details you can add in there, but let's keep it as that. Then design outputs, yeah, unit tests, software system tests, and so on. Like would be taking too long to talk about that now. But like the interesting bit, like with verification validation, like Nidhi was explaining that some, but like there's a really stupidly simple example that may help to go over that. Like let's say you have a user need of building a hammer, like really just like a normal hammer that you use to put in nails in the wall. And then you derive this design inputs and something was really wrong there. So like someone writes in, you want a hammer made from glass. I mean, it doesn't make sense typically, right? But somehow this is how your design inputs end up with. Well, then you do the verification, like you verify, yep, this glass hammer was built very well. It was made from glass. It kind of looks good. It's transparent and all of that. But then you come to validation, and luckily you derive that from the user needs, where it says you want to be able to put nails in the wall. Well, then you use your glass hammer and it shatters. So it's clearly not fit for those user needs. And well, typically you don't want to figure that out like last minute. And this is why you have like good design controls to ensure the user needs get translated properly into design inputs. So basically like catching those potentially huge problems as early as possible and not last minute. Okay, back to you, Nidhi.
Absolutely. Thank you. So ultimately, to wrap it up, the take-home message is that you have your design controls pretty much to reduce product risks, and design controls always have to be linked to the risks. So to ensure traceability, you cannot have a random design control or a requirement that you just build the device for. It always has to be shown that you are reducing some kind of a risk. That's why identifying risks early on becomes very important. And to actually hammer home a message is that this design controls help you also to tell a very good story to the FDA and notified bodies all around the world. That is the story that helps you talk about your product and how well you designed your product. And what regulatory can do throughout this life cycle is basically help make informed decisions for a successful product development. Like sometimes the cloud is not making decisions in your entire product. So maybe you can avoid submitting that cloud. But if the cloud has decision-making capabilities that becomes part of the submission. So those kind of decisions become important early on, and they're very much part of how you want to design your product. That's why involving regulatory early on is key for a successful product development and a successful FDA or other notified bodies clearances. So I will wrap it up with that and open the floor for any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much to both of you. I really enjoyed the hammer references all throughout. So thank you for that. I think, yeah, it's really, really interesting. You touched on lots of different subjects here, from design control, from the input requirements. And I really like, Nidhi, what you were talking about in terms of, defining the intended use of your product, because you don't, a product that can, measure a specific parameter or a biomarker doesn't necessarily have the same intended use as a product that can, diagnose a disease. Same as a device that is able to prevent infection isn't the same as a device that is simply able to, prevent the growth of bacteria. So I really liked those explanations. You mentioned the timing of when a startup should start really considering and seriously implementing regulatory, because obviously it's not top of mind when you're developing a new product. So what can you say to the timing of when an early startup should start incorporating regulatory affairs, and how do you think they can realistically integrate this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe respond to that, because I'll also then have to run fairly soon, and Nidhi can maybe respond to the next one. I mean, obviously, like the simple answer to that would be like to do everything from the very beginning, but that would be like the ideal world. And in an ideal world, we would all be sitting on a tropical island or so. So meaning like that typically doesn't happen. So in other words, I mean, in the beginning, a startup typically in the beginning, like builds a prototype and has to find product market fit, has to find out how it fits into reimbursement schemes, has to do a lot of things. So, and if you would do all quality management systems right, or stuff right from the beginning, you would probably not get anywhere. I mean, not saying don't do quality management, but so it's most important to know what to do at what point. And one approach that we really got to appreciate over time is, let's say, if you don't really know what you're doing in the beginning, just try to have, let's say, a monthly or bi-monthly check-in with someone who knows that stuff, to see whether you're kind of basically to find the right point when you need to start documenting things properly. And let's say if you run a usability study, they may just tell you, hey, document that. It's not a lot of work writing that down, but it will help you tremendously later on. Or if you run a clinical trial, they may tell you, hey, this may be illegal to do. Well, this would be good to know, because you shouldn't do things illegally, right? So basically having someone with you who is basically some kind of coach or advisor who helps you on a very low effort basis throughout the beginning, like the formative part of the company or project, to then also decide the right time decide on the right time when to kick in with more quality management stuff.
Just one other comment I'd like to just inject here, because it was top of mind. And by the way, thanks for sharing and diving into this stuff too. But a risk that I see that's sometimes not addressed in quality, in the development process or quality management process, is the training of the target users, may it be a physician or a patient. Because misuse of or misinterpretation, especially when you're dealing with imaging, is actually a much more acute problem than people are talking about right now. And so when we're working with radiology, AI imaging companies, or things in that general vein, understanding of how you're going to train the users, radiologists or an oncologist or somebody like that, or a surgeon, how to read the images and then inject the takeaways into their care path, or how they're treating the patient, is also important. And it's not normally well documented as a known risk and something to be considered like a design criteria. So just not necessarily making a statement, just something to think about, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Daniel. Are there any questions from the audience. If anyone wants to unmute themselves, ask a question, post it in the chat, please feel free. And otherwise, we'll be wrapping up in a few seconds. No? Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for staying on for an extra couple of minutes. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn if you want to stay up to date with any future events. We've got lots of really interesting topics planned, and we look forward to sharing them with you soon. So thank you again to our speakers today, and look forward to seeing you on the next one.